So this is the Leica M11-P. It's got all the same specs as the regular M11, but it does add the upgrades from the M11 monochrome that we checked out earlier this year, like 256 gigs of internal storage and that sapphire glass on the back, for $200 more. Otherwise, it's the same camera. Same 60 megapixel bin sensor, same classic design, same really great image quality. But I mean, if you were looking for those upgrades from the regular M11 and hadn't picked one up yet, might be worth a look. But this video isn't really about the M11-P. I mean, kind of, but stick with me here.
Artificial intelligence is here, and it is here to stay.
After an artist entered a photo competition with an image generated by artificial intelligence and won.
Now an AI-generated collaborative track that mimics the voice of singers Drake and The Weeknd, that's been submitted for Grammys consideration.
Unless you haven't been on the internet in the last year and a half or so, you probably know that the world has been changing really fast. Every single month, large language models are getting cheaper and faster to train. Another industry is getting disrupted, and that veil of what is real and what is fake or modified is getting thinner and thinner. It's not that fake content hasn't been a problem for a long time. I mean, that's pretty much always been a problem. It's just that in the last year and a half specifically, with the growth of generative AI, the ability for anyone to go and modify content and put it out into the world has grown really dramatically. I mean, generative fill can completely change the context of an image. Video can be modified really easily now. There's AI voice mapping and deepfakes and all of this information that's just being modified and spread across the internet. So what do we do about this kind of thing? Well, people have been having this conversation for a while, and there's a bunch of different solutions out there that people are trying to make more popular. But one that you're probably going to start hearing about pretty soon is the Content Authenticity Initiative and Content Credentials, specifically because it's starting to launch in cameras, including today with the launch of the Leica M11-P. Content credentials are not about detecting bad actors and detecting AI-generated content. That's really hard. It's rather about giving transparency about what's provably true, what's been modified about the content. It's kind of like cybersecurity, right? They're just gonna keep hacking into your stuff and you have to keep patching it. In this case, they're just gonna keep making modified images and you'd have to keep identifying it. And that's just gonna be this indefinite rat race. So instead, providing transparency around what you're doing to your images, how you captured them, how you're sharing them, kind of builds a lot of authority and authenticity around your content. So the core technology behind content credentials is something called cryptographic provenance. This basically means that you're giving a history, you're giving an insight into everything that's been done and changed about the image, like the origin, all the modifications that have been made to it, but in a read-only way. It's encrypted. You can't actually modify that history, you can just add to it. Here's what's happening in that process, and let's use the Leica M11-P as an example for this, since it's the first commercially available camera with content credentials built in. So the M11-P has a secure chipset in it that stores this cryptographic key. When someone that's using the camera takes a photo, the camera creates a JSON file with a number of pieces of information about that photo, like the camera it was taken on, the photographer, the hash, the date and time. This is called a manifest. It's basically a special set of metadata about the camera and the image. At that point, the camera digitally signs and embeds that metadata into the image in this read-only way. Now let's say I bring that image into Lightroom or Photoshop or any program that supports content credentials to make some modifications. At that point, the program then re-signs the image and creates that lineage that can be read by those services. That's what adds a history to the image. You can see all of the modifications that were made to the photo, or if you needed to use multiple images to create a single file, both of those images would show up in the history too. So am I saying that you need a content credentials enabled camera in order for this to work? I mean, the Leica M11-P is $9,200 and not very many people are going to have a camera like that. And fortunately, no. Content credentials is open sourced and any program that supports it will be able to sign images and create more lineage. For example, I'm a photographer that shoots a lot of film, and a piece of film in these 80s film scanners are not gonna have a content credentials chipset built in. Luckily, as soon as I scan one of my pieces of film and I bring it into an editing program, I can then sign my image and put it out into the world. Again, this is more about promoting transparency of your content so that people can hopefully know that it was real, how it was taken, all of that kind of stuff. So all that being said, being able to sign an image at point of capture like you can do on the Leica M11-P is actually really useful, right? Because then the lineage starts directly at the camera. On any other image, you could just sign it on the computer and it makes it a lot easier to fake. But if the original point of capture is from the camera, you know that that's a legit image. And if it's been modified after that, you'll be able to know that too. Now that said, Adobe is enabling content credentials by default in any of its generative stuff like Adobe Firefly. So if you create an image totally through Adobe Firefly, it will have content credentials built in and it'll say, this is an AI generated image. Now, obviously the Content Authenticity Initiative would like everyone that is making AI generated content to enable this by default to give transparency around what's real and what's fake. That's definitely not going to happen, but the more people that do it, the more you'll be able to trust those organizations. And theoretically, this could be added to any type of media, right? Like video, for example. Say Final Cut or Premiere added support for content credentials and YouTube had support for it too. If I added credentials to this video, uploaded it to YouTube, there could be a little badge that shows when it was uploaded, who it was uploaded by, maybe the specs of my machine or something like that. And that would just give a little bit of transparency into the origin of the video. Then if it was like downloaded and re-uploaded to someone else's YouTube channel, you'd be able to see, oh no, this was originally made by David. So this isn't perfect, right? There still are some problems here. Like theoretically, someone could go and screenshot one of my images and then bring it into Photoshop, re-sign it, and upload it to the internet. There'd be a lot of red flags, but it definitely would be a little bit harder to spot. And I asked Adobe about this, and this was their official response. But this is going to be pretty useful for news organizations, right? They all have all these photographers on the ground that are trying to get images up as fast as possible. And if all of them have content credentials on them, that gives a lot of transparency about those images, especially if news organizations required their photographers to use cameras with content credentials built in. You'd have a lot more transparency about that camera and what happened to that image at the point of capture, whether it was modified, if there were adjustments made or generative fill added. You would know that and it would bring a little bit of transparency back to news. It's obviously not viable for a bunch of news organizations to buy a bunch of new cameras for their photographers just to make sure they have content credentials, but they could make sure that they pass them through Lightroom and get them all signed before they're uploaded to a website. Also, Nikon's releasing an updated version of the Z9 with content credentials built in. So maybe over time we'll see a lot of camera manufacturers releasing new cameras that have this capability, but we'll have to see. There are almost 2,000 members of the Content Authenticity Initiative at the time of publishing this video, like camera manufacturers and technology companies and news organizations. But we're really gonna have to see if this actually hits critical mass for it to be able to work. Like, we don't want another Betamax situation or mini disc, right? We need something to hit critical mass so that it becomes a norm. Anyways, guys, that's about it. Just wanted to put that out there because you're probably going to start seeing that content credentials logo a lot more now, especially since it's embedded in all these editing programs. So just wanted to let you know how that works. If you've got any other questions, drop them in the comments below and we'll catch you in the next video. See ya.